You think you know a person. You share a bed, a life, dreams, and secrets. You look into their eyes every day and you believe, truly believe, that you know the soul looking back. My husband, Mark, shattered that belief. He didn't just lie, he built a meticulous 2-year-long performance of devotion, vulnerability, and illness, all while acting as a spy in our own home. My nightmare began 5 years into our marriage. Mark was working in marketing, but he wasn't passionate about it. I, on the other hand, was rapidly rising at Innovatech, a top-tier tech firm specializing in proprietary encryption software. We were a classic couple. Him, supportive and kind, me, career-focused and ambitious. Then came the accident. Mark claimed he suffered a severe concussion during a minor fall down our basement stairs. The initial reports were fine, but 2 days later, he woke up unable to see. The doctors called it cortical blindness, a rare condition where the eyes are fine, but the visual processing center of the brain is damaged. They said it was temporary, maybe 6 months. My reaction was immediate, absolute devotion. I became his eyes, his guide, his rock. My career, my ambition, everything took a back seat. I moved mountains to care for him. I installed tactile strips in the house, learned how to guide him, and read to him every night. Mark was, in the beginning, the perfect patient. He was initially devastated, but he quickly became incredibly dependent and touchingly grateful. He praised my strength constantly. "You're amazing, Sarah," he'd whisper, holding my hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You're my light in the darkness." That vulnerability solidified my love. I felt so fiercely protective of him, so proud of myself for handling this crisis with grace. As the months passed, Mark's condition persisted. The 6 months turned into a year. He adapted beautifully. He mastered navigating the house with a cane, learned Braille quickly, and became hyper-aware of sounds and scents. He even started focusing on his hearing, often listening intently when I took work calls. Meanwhile, my career at Innovatech started soaring. The company was developing a breakthrough encryption protocol, nicknamed Project Aegis, worth hundreds of millions. I was promoted to lead project manager. This meant I was privy to virtually all the critical, highly confidential trade secrets. Because Mark was blind and entirely dependent on me, he was always around. "I hate leaving you alone all day, honey," I'd tell him. "Nonsense, Sarah," he'd reply, reaching out to touch my face. "I'm safer here, and besides, I love listening to you succeed. Just keep me updated on your day. Tell me everything." And I did. I was so stressed and burdened by my responsibilities at work and his needs at home that I sometimes used him as my sounding board. I would vent about security breaches, internal politics, and sometimes even about the pressure points of Project Aegis. I never gave away specifics, of course, but I gave him the framework, the vulnerabilities, the deadlines. I talked about who knew what. It never occurred to me that I was talking to an enemy agent. He was blind. He was my husband. Who would suspect a man who needed me to butter his toast and read him the news? The first tiny, almost imperceptible crack in his facade appeared about 6 months into his blindness. We were watching a movie, or rather I was watching, and he was listening. It was an old black and white film. I remember clearly reaching for the remote, which was on the far edge of the coffee table, beyond his reach. "Grab the remote, honey," I said, my attention on the screen. Mark reached out, not hesitating, not fumbling, and his hand landed directly on the remote control, picking it up instantly. He then handed it to me. I froze for a split second. A blind person, especially one with cortical blindness, relies on memory, sound, and touch. To locate a small, unfamiliar object on a large table with that level of spatial precision was highly improbable, bordering on impossible, even with practice. "Wow," I said, trying to sound impressed, not suspicious. "Your spatial memory is incredible, Mark. You hit that perfectly." He chuckled, a casual, easy sound. "Years of practice, my love." The darkness makes you focus on the other senses. The moment passed, but the image of his hand reaching out, swift and accurate, stuck in my mind. Then there was the incident with the email. I was working late one night on the couch, laptop open. Mark was supposedly asleep in the next room. I had stepped away to the kitchen for a glass of water. I was gone for perhaps 90 seconds. When I returned, Mark was standing in the living room doorway. He had his cane out, tapping the floor hesitantly. "Sarah, are you still up?" "I thought I heard a noise," he asked, his head slightly tilted, feigning confusion. "Just getting water, honey," I replied. Later that night, I was reviewing my emails. I had left my laptop unlocked and the Innovatech VPN connected. I noticed one of my critical, highly confidential emails regarding Project Aegis had been marked as unread just moments before I came back from the kitchen. I had definitely opened and read that email hours ago. A simple glitch, a system error? Or had he, in those 90 seconds, somehow navigated the room without his cane, found the computer, opened his eyes, accessed the crucial information, and then quickly marked the email as unread before returning to his blind stance in the doorway? The question was ridiculous, monstrous, and utterly terrifying. I dismissed it as paranoia brought on by stress. "He's blind, Sarah. You're losing it." But the small, insistent whisper of doubt began to grow into a persistent hum. The third and most definitive red flag came during a family dinner with his mother, Lydia. Lydia was visiting and was openly coddling Mark, cutting his food and guiding him. At one point, Lydia placed a plate of elaborate appetizers on the table. Small decorative squares of smoked salmon and dill cream cheese. She then reached for the salt shaker, which was right in front of Mark. As she reached for the shaker, Mark casually, instinctively, reached his hand out to stop her from knocking over a very delicate, nearly invisible small glass vase sitting right next to the shaker. He hadn't been warned. There was no sound cue. He simply saw the trajectory of her arm and preemptively blocked the accident. Lydia didn't even notice, but I did. My breath hitched. That was not the action of a man relying on sound or memory. That was the action of a man with perfect instant peripheral vision. I watched him. His eyes, usually staring blankly, slightly unfocused as per the doctor's diagnosis, were suddenly still too perfect. A terrifying hypothesis formed in my mind. What if he wasn't blind at all? What if he was just incredibly talented at faking it? But the question was too big to process. Why? Why endure 2 years of fake illness and dependency? The only thing that had changed in our life was my access to Project Aegis. That night, I started my own investigation. The paranoia was unbearable. I decided to test him, gently, secretly. I intentionally left a single vital document related to Project Aegis, a harmless, non-confidential mock-up diagram on the kitchen counter, well out of his usual traffic path. I told him I was leaving for a quick store run, but I didn't leave. I hid the car in the neighbor's driveway and crept back into the house through the back door, hiding behind the pantry door where I could see the kitchen without being seen. 10 minutes later, Mark emerged. He took 2 hesitant steps with his cane. Then he stopped. He looked around, and the moment he confirmed he was alone, he did something that made my blood run cold. He dropped the cane. His head lifted, his eyes, his perfectly clear, perfectly focused eyes, flickered around the room, making direct visual contact with the diagram on the counter. He walked over, without fumbling, without hesitation, picked up the paper, and started reading. He wasn't blind. He was a perfect liar. The sight of Mark reading the document, his eyes clear and focused, didn't just break my heart, it ignited a cold, calculated fury in my chest. He hadn't been an unfortunate victim. He had been a meticulous 2-year-long spy. The vulnerability, the dependency, the whispered gratitude, it was all a brilliant, twisted performance designed to gain my absolute trust and access to Innovatech's most sensitive data. The why was screamingly obvious. Project Aegis, my company's multi-million-dollar encryption protocol. Mark's initial job was stagnant. My career was soaring, giving me proximity to a massive financial opportunity. He hadn't faked blindness for attention, he faked it for access. I couldn't confront him immediately. If I did, he would deny it. And the evidence, my testimony against a blind man, would be laughably weak. I needed proof of his intent and his accomplices. I needed to catch him in the act of espionage. My first move was to secure my life and my career. I immediately changed all my company passwords and ensured every document related to Project Aegis was stored on secure, biometric locked drives I kept at the office. I started bringing home only dummy or obfuscated files to maintain the illusion that I was still careless with my work. Then, I focused on the spy. Mark was meticulous, but even the best spy leaves a digital footprint. Since he was blind, he had never worried about me looking at his devices. The biggest challenge was his computer. I knew he must have been communicating with someone. I waited until he was in the shower, feigning a long, slow ablution that his disability necessitated. I raced to his home office. His laptop was password protected, but I knew his old passwords. I tried the last one he used before the accident. It worked. I started digging. I checked his browsing history. All clean. News sites, audiobooks, forums for the visually impaired. A brilliant cover. I checked his email, which was equally barren. It wasn't until I checked his cloud storage that I hit the jackpot. Hidden deep within a folder innocuously labeled Braille Learning Materials was a series of encrypted files. I didn't have the key, but the file names were damning. Aegis Blueprint Q3.zip, Innovatech Valuation Forecast.pdf, and most chillingly, Payment Schedule Milestone 1.docx. The payment schedule file was a smoking gun. It detailed a series of large offshore wire transfers tied to specific milestones in the development of Project Aegis. The payments were structured to avoid triggering suspicious activity reports coming from a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands called ShadowNet Dynamics. The first transfer was for $150,000, made 2 weeks after I was promoted to lead project manager. The reason? Initial information packet. Mark wasn't just stealing trade secrets. He was actively, lucratively selling them. He was a professional industrial spy using our marriage and his fake disability as the perfect cover. I quickly took screenshots downloading the entire Braille folder onto an encrypted USB drive. I logged off, wiped his recent history, and was back downstairs pouring coffee just as he emerged, tapping his cane and smiling his perfect, grateful, blind husband's smile. "Rough day at work, honey?" he asked, tilting his head toward the sound of the clattering dishes. "Terrible," I lied smoothly. "I think we had a security scare. They're cracking down on data access. I might have to stop working from home entirely." His smile didn't falter, but I saw a brief, sharp flicker of concern in his blind eyes before he masked it perfectly. I knew then that my threat had landed. He was terrified of losing his data stream. Now I knew the extent of his betrayal, the goal, and the name of his employer. I had to prove he wasn't blind. I went to my CTO, Chief Technology Officer at Innovatech, a man named Mr. Harrison, who I trusted implicitly. I asked for a private, urgent meeting. I didn't tell him everything immediately. I just presented him with the decrypted files and the ShadowNet Dynamics payment schedule. "Sir, I believe we have an internal leak of Project Aegis," I said, my voice low and steady. "The thief is supplying data to a competitor via this shell corporation. The leak started about 2 years ago, right when I was promoted." Harrison was horrified. He immediately called in the security team. I knew my own name would be at the top of the suspect list. I had the access, after all. "Who do you suspect, Sarah?" Harrison asked, his eyes narrow. I took a deep breath. "Sir, you need to understand, this is going to sound insane, but the thief is my husband, Mark. He's been spying on me for 2 years. He's not blind." Harrison scoffed. "Mark? The one who lost his sight in the accident? Sarah, I saw him at the company function last year. He couldn't find his own way to the restroom." "It was a performance, sir." "A very sophisticated one. He gained my trust by feigning dependency, and he gained unlimited access to my work by ensuring I would never suspect the man who needed me to tie his shoes." I showed him the video I had taken on my phone, the shaky, grainy footage of Mark reading the mock-up diagram in the kitchen. Harrison's jaw dropped. The evidence of Mark's sight was undeniable. Innovatech immediately engaged a top cybersecurity and private investigations firm. Our goal was not just to expose Mark, but to dismantle ShadowNet Dynamics and recover Project Aegis. The investigators loved my idea for the final trap. It had to be undeniable, public, and fully documented. We created a honeypot, a deliberately weakened version of a new, supposedly critical Project Aegis data packet. This packet, titled Aegis v2 Core Algorithms, Final Review, would be placed on my home laptop, secured only by a password I would intentionally whisper aloud while Mark was sleeping. The packet contained a GPS tracker and a digital signature that would instantly alert Innovatech servers the moment the file was accessed, copied, or transmitted. The trap was set for Saturday morning. That Friday night, I went through the motions of a stressed wife. Mark read Braille in the living room while I worked on the couch. "God, this Project Aegis V2 is driving me crazy." I sighed dramatically, loud enough for him to hear over his white noise machine. "I have to review the core algorithms tonight, but I'm so tired." I yawned loudly, stood up, and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Good night, honey. I'm going to crash. I'm just going to leave my laptop open and unlocked here. It's too much trouble to close out all the programs. The password to the file is Innovatech for life if I forget it in the morning." I kissed the top of his head. He smiled sweetly, his blind eyes staring blankly into the distance. "Sleep well, my light," he said, turning back to his Braille book. "You've earned it." I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I watched the clock tick toward 3 a.m., the hour of the spy. I had strategically placed a hidden camera facing the living room and connected a discreet sound recording device. I was armed with the knowledge of his betrayal and the cold, hard certainty that my marriage was a lie. I just had to wait for him to open his eyes. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Every tiny sound from the living room, the settling of the house, the ticking of the clock, sounded deafeningly loud. I was waiting for the perfect husband, the blind man who relied on me for everything, to transform into the cunning, sighted thief. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I heard the faint, rhythmic sound of Mark's cane tapping the floor outside our bedroom door. He was beginning his performance. The tapping was hesitant, slow, the movements of a man navigating darkness. He stopped at the hallway, and then silence. I heard the distinctive soft click of his bedroom door closing, followed by the fainter click of the light switch being turned off, a gesture he always performed to prove his blindness, even though he relied on me to do most things. A minute passed, then 2. I held my breath, waiting for the charade to end. Finally, I heard it, the soft, confident sound of footsteps. No tapping cane, just the purposeful, silent stride of a man who could see exactly where he was going. I eased myself out of bed, creeping silently to the bedroom door. I put my ear to the wood. I heard the faint whir of my laptop fan starting up in the living room. He had activated the honey pot. On the other side of the city at Innovatech headquarters, a dedicated security team was watching the digital trail. The moment Mark typed in the password, Innovatech for life, the GPS tracker inside the file would ping, confirming his physical location and his intent to access the stolen data. The security team was already in position, waiting for the final damning move, the attempt to copy or transmit the file to ShadowNet Dynamics. I waited 5 agonizing minutes, enough time for him to download the file and initiate the transfer. The moment the security confirmation pinged on my phone, a simple coded text message from Mr. Harrison, confirmed, file accessed. I knew the trap had sprung. I threw open the bedroom door and walked into the living room, flipping on the main light. Mark was sitting exactly where I had left my laptop. He wasn't wearing his glasses. His eyes, wide, green, and terrified, were staring directly at the laptop screen, currently showing the final upload confirmation screen for the honeypot file. His hand was resting on the mouse. He froze, caught in the stark, sudden glare of the overhead light, looking exactly like a deer caught in headlights. "Mark," I said, my voice cutting and calm, utterly devoid of the sympathy I had shown him for 2 years. "I can see you." He quickly slammed the laptop shut and scrambled off the couch, fumbling for his cane, which was leaning against the far wall, a wall he had walked straight to without assistance just moments before. "Sarah." What are you doing up? Turn the light off, my eyes," he stammered, raising his hand to shield his face, a practiced gesture. "Stop the performance, Mark," I commanded, crossing my arms. "It's over. I saw you walk. I saw you read the screen. Your eyes are fine. They have been for 2 years." He tried one final desperate maneuver. He reached out blindly, dramatically stumbling toward me. "I don't know what you're talking about, sweetheart. I'm disoriented. The sudden light." "You reached out and stopped your mother from knocking over a fragile glass vase 3 weeks ago," I interrupted, cutting him down with the memory of the red flag. "You navigated the house perfectly without your cane before you went to the kitchen that night, And just now, you found the escape route to the wall before you even thought to use your cane. I walked over and pointed at the computer. You were just stealing trade secrets, Mark. Project Aegis V2. You were planning to sell it to ShadowNet Dynamics for your next payment. You faked being blind for 2 years to gain my trust and steal my career. His mask of confusion evaporated, replaced by a cold, frightening fury. He realized I knew everything. It was your fault, he spat out, dropping the pretense entirely. His voice was no longer soft and dependent. It was hard and sharp. You got promoted. You got the access. I was stuck in a dead-end job. I did this because you were too busy working to see the opportunity. I was going to use the money to set us up for life. You wouldn't even have to work anymore. You tried to ruin my company and betray our marriage for $150,000, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. That's not love, Mark. That's extortion. Suddenly, the front door burst open. 2 uniformed police officers rushed in, followed by Mr. Harrison and a private investigator who immediately moved to secure the laptop. Mark stared, his face turning an ashen white. He hadn't just been caught by his wife. He had been caught by the company and the law. Mark Peterson, one of the officers stated, "You are under arrest for suspicion of corporate espionage, wire fraud, and theft of trade secrets." He didn't resist. He was too stunned. As the officers cuffed his hands behind his back, he turned to me, his eyes now truly showing fear and desperation. "Sarah, please. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them I'm blind. You're my wife. You have to help me." I took a step back, separating myself completely from the criminal being led away. "I am not your wife, Mark," I said, my voice clear and ringing in the quiet living room. "I was your Mark. And now you can spend the next few years practicing Braille in a cell, because that's the only thing you're truly blind to, my loyalty." As he was led out, still pleading my name, Mr. Harrison approached me, his face filled with grim respect. "The file was successfully transmitted, Sarah," he confirmed, "but because it was the honeypot, it contained a digital virus that has successfully infected ShadowNet's servers. They won't just be shut down, their entire infrastructure will be neutralized. You saved Project Aegis and the company. You're a hero." I looked around the living room, at the laptop, the dropped cane, and the spot where my husband had just been arrested. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt sick and empty. The immediate relief of justice was quickly replaced by the crushing reality. My marriage was a lie, my love was a tool, and my life for the past 2 years had been a co-starring role in my husband's Oscar-worthy criminal performance. The aftermath of Mark's arrest was a whirlwind of legal, corporate, and emotional fallout. Innovatech hailed me as a hero. They immediately gave me a substantial bonus and promised full legal support for the criminal case against Mark and the civil suit against ShadowNet Dynamics. I had secured my job, but my personal life was in ruins. Mark was facing serious federal charges, multiple counts of wire fraud, industrial espionage, and conspiracy. But the most bizarre part of the entire ordeal was the reaction of Mark's family. Lydia, Mark's mother, called me the day after the arrest, utterly hysterical. I assumed she was calling to apologize for her son's monstrous betrayal. I was wrong. "Sarah, you have to stop this immediately," she wailed into the phone. "They can't charge him. He's blind. He couldn't possibly have stolen anything. You have to tell the police it was a mistake." I was speechless. "Lydia, He is not blind. He faked it for 2 years. I have video proof, and the company has evidence of his perfectly cited espionage. Lies! All lies, she shrieked. You're covering up your own involvement, Sarah. You're trying to ruin my son because your company failed. Mark is a victim. You are manipulating the courts. He can't see the evidence. He can't read the charges. You are taking advantage of a disabled man. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They were clinging to the disability narrative as their primary defense, not just in public, but to me, the only person who had seen him walk and read. They were betting that the emotional weight of his disability would outweigh the hard evidence of his crime. I tried to reason with her, explaining the video and the bank accounts, but she was impermeable, caught in a delusion crafted to protect her son's innocence, or at least his image. Mark called me from jail, Lydia continued, her voice hardening. He told me he's wearing his dark glasses for the defense team. He said you tricked him. He said you forced him to open the laptop when he was disoriented. We are hiring the best defense attorney, and they will prove that you were the one exploiting his blindness to frame him. I realized then that Mark had not only maintained the lie to the world, but had convinced his own family to become co-conspirators in his deceit. The blind act wasn't just a cover for espionage. It was an exit strategy, a ready-made defense against prosecution. I immediately filed for divorce. The legal battles became two-pronged: the federal criminal prosecution and my personal divorce proceedings. The divorce was a battlefield. Mark's defense attorney, a slick, aggressive man named Mr. Vance, argued that Mark, as a disabled person, was entitled to significant spousal support and half of the marital assets, claiming he was unfairly penalized because his disability prevented him from gaining steady employment. Mr. Vance even tried to use the footage of Mark reading the document against me, claiming I coerced a confused, partially sighted man into performing an action to discredit him. But I was prepared. My lawyer presented the full, unedited video footage, the toxicological reports from the initial doctors, proving the blindness was likely, psychosomatic or fake from the start, lacking the expected neurological markers, and crucially, the ShadowNet Dynamics payment schedule. The evidence proved that Mark was not a victim of disability. He was an architect of deceit, using the perceived disability to generate illegal income far exceeding my own salary. My lawyer meticulously argued that Mark's 2 years of care constituted criminal fraud within the marriage, negating any claim to spousal support. Mr. Peterson spent 2 years actively spying on and defrauding his wife's company, all while feigning a disability that required her full-time care and emotional support, my lawyer argued to the judge. He used his status as a disabled spouse to gain physical access to classified material. Not only did he steal, but he used deception to steal the very resources, time, money, emotional energy that Mrs. Thompson provided to keep the marriage functioning. This is grounds for divorce based on marital fraud and extreme cruelty. The judge, clearly appalled by the evidence of the elaborate ruse, agreed. The final divorce ruling was a resounding victory. Mark received none of the marital assets and was ordered to pay a symbolic sum in restitution for the emotional trauma and fraud, a sum I immediately donated to a charity supporting genuine victims of corporate espionage. The most satisfying part of the ruling was the judge's statement. Mr. Peterson, You used blindness as a weapon, tarnishing the integrity of those who truly suffer. Your actions constitute a profound betrayal of trust and legal principle. Mark's criminal trial followed 6 months later. Despite his defense attorney's best efforts to maintain the blind victim narrative, the combination of my testimony, the video evidence, the captured data, and the wire transfers proved overwhelming. Mark was convicted on all major counts. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, a severe penalty reflecting the scale and duration of his deception. I never spoke to Mark or his mother again. I officially changed my last name back to my maiden name, Thompson. I saw a picture of Lydia in a local newspaper months later. She was protesting outside the federal courthouse with a sign that read, "Justice for the Blind." She was completely alone, clinging desperately to the final, failed lie. I realized then that Mark and his mother were fundamentally trapped in their own illusion. They believed the performance so fully that they would rather face prison and public ridicule than admit the truth, that Mark was not a tragic victim, but a calculating, sighted criminal. My life was now truly my own. I was free of the spy, free of the lie, and financially secure. But the lingering paranoia remained. The day Mark's conviction was finalized, I didn't celebrate. I simply went home, closed the door, and allowed myself to grieve. Not for the loss of Mark, but for the loss of 2 years of my life, my innocence and my blind trust. The emotional toll was staggering. I had been caring for a sighted criminal, tying his shoelaces, reading him classified reports, and believing his whispered gratitude, all while he mocked my devotion with perfectly clear eyes. My recovery was a slow, deliberate climb out of a deep, emotional pit. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in complex trauma and betrayal. The hardest part wasn't the theft of the secrets, it was the theft of my reality. Every shared memory, our anniversary trip, the quiet evenings, the moments of deep intimacy, was now scrutinized and labeled. Was that genuine, or was that part of the performance? I eventually realized that Mark's deception was so profound that it had to be a part of his core identity. He wasn't just acting blind, he was emotionally blind to the concept of genuine love and reciprocity. He saw people, especially me, as assets to be exploited. Innovatech was incredibly supportive. I was promoted again, given a senior role that included running the new security protocols I had helped develop. Ironically, the very betrayal that was supposed to ruin my career was the catalyst for my greatest professional success. I became the company's foremost expert in internal threat detection. I learned to use my paranoia, born of Mark's deceit, as a professional tool for vigilance. But the personal price was high. I became hyper-vigilant. I couldn't stand being touched unexpectedly. I would flinch if someone approached me silently. I installed high-tech security cameras, not to monitor intruders, but to monitor my own space, my own reality. I constantly checked my reflection in windows and mirrors, trying to ensure that my own perception was not being warped again. Dating became a terrifying prospect. How do you ever trust again when the person you loved most, the one you cared for most deeply in their weakest moment, turned out to be your most sophisticated enemy? I was single for over 3 years, content to focus on my career and my small circle of truly vetted friends. The incident with Lydia, Mark's mother, faded into obscurity, but I kept the legal protections in place. I knew that the lie was their life raft, and they would cling to it forever. For them, Mark's time in prison was simply an unfortunate temporary side effect of a world that failed to recognize his genius and disability. I did have one final chilling interaction with the past, entirely by accident. I was giving a keynote address at a major cybersecurity conference in Chicago. I spoke about the importance of soft security. Not just firewalls, but the security of relationships and the vigilance required against deception masked as trust. After the speech, a man approached me. He was impeccably dressed, mid-50s, with a cold, assessing gaze. He introduced himself as an executive from a rival firm. "That was a brilliant presentation, Ms. Thompson," he said, shaking my hand a little too firmly. "Your insights on human psychology and espionage are unparalleled. You speak with great personal conviction." He paused, lowering his voice. "We followed the Mark Peterson case closely. We always suspected there was more to the blind man than the media reported. It takes immense emotional strength to maintain that kind of performance, and even more to uncover it. But I have to ask." He leaned in conspiratorially. "The real question is, Ms. Thompson, who was Mark working for before ShadowNet? That kind of talent doesn't just emerge overnight, especially the faked injury." His question hit me with the force of a physical blow. Mark had mentioned a previous stagnant marketing job. But what if the accident that caused the blindness wasn't an accident at all, but the beginning of a new, highly specialized job, a job that required him to disappear into a role of dependency for long-term data acquisition? I realized Mark wasn't just a spontaneous opportunist. He was a deep-cover operative, possibly trained long before I met him, and his blindness was simply the most effective cover story he could use to access a top-tier target: me and my company. The 2 years of care I provided were not acts of love. They were essential support for his long-term criminal mission. I looked at the executive, whose eyes held a hungry, calculating gleam. I knew then that the world of espionage was far larger and darker than I had ever imagined, and Mark was just a small, albeit highly effective piece of it. "My investigation stopped when the perpetrator was convicted, sir," I said, meeting his gaze evenly. "But I assure you, Innovatech's security protocols, which I now oversee, are designed to detect even the most sophisticated long-term deceit. We learned our lesson well. I politely excused myself, but the realization remained. Mark's betrayal was a calculated career move, and his greatest success was convincing me, the person who saw him every day, that he had lost his sight, when in fact he was using his vision to plot my downfall. So why am I sharing this, dredging up the pain of those 2 years? Because I want to give you, the listener, the sight that Mark tried to steal from me. If the person you love suddenly becomes entirely dependent on you, look closer. If the emotional cost of supporting them outweighs their gratitude, look closer. If the story feels too perfect, too tragic, or too convenient for their financial goals, look closer. The most dangerous people are not the ones who hide in the shadows. They are the ones who hide in plain sight, using your compassion and your love as a weapon. My divorce was final. Mark is in prison and I am safe. I am no longer Sarah, the devoted wife. I am Sarah Thompson, the woman who fought a sighted spy masquerading as a blind victim, and who now sees the world and every relationship in it with eyes wide open. And that is a victory no amount of stolen trade secrets can ever diminish. Thank you for listening to this difficult confession. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments section below.